Welcome to your Series 63 review. In this session, we are going to dive deep into Unit 5, Communications with Customers, and Unit 6, Ethical Practices and Obligations, using medium and difficult level questions. The way to get the most value out of this session is to have the questions in front of you, download that PDF, and ideally, you will have done the questions either before watching or you will do each question before you play my breakdown and showing of the actual answer. In doing so, you're going to get the most value in unpacking each of the answer choices, figuring out why is the right answer right and why are the wrong answers wrong. With that, let's jump right into it with question number 1. Here we go. So in the evolving landscape of IA, investment advisory firms, and BD, broker-dealer business communications, what is the regulatory stance of the SEC regarding record-keeping requirements for, quote, off-channel communication systems such as WhatsApp or Twitter? Now, I read you that question. If you haven't done the questions yet, now is the time to pause the video. Maybe you need to reread the question stem and then provide your insight for each of the 4 answer choices. Is it the right answer? If so, why? Is it the wrong answer? If so, why is it not correct? And if you're sort of in the middle, identify with these questions in particular what you're unsure about so that either you can focus on that when I unpack that, or if you need to head back to the textbook or back to the other resources, you can do so. All right. Have you had a chance to pick an answer here? Okay, I hope what you were able to find is that the SEC's regulatory stance is that you need to have consistent record-keeping standards for both off-channel, so that's things like social, WhatsApp, Twitter, and more traditional communication methods like email, faxes, traditional written messaging. And the standard here is a consistency across platforms. For all of these systems, firms have to ensure that they can maintain appropriate records, providing 2 years of easy access and then maybe 3 or 5 years for record retention so that if a regulator comes in, they're able to get that communication and see, was it deceptive? Was it manipulative? Was it inaccurate? Were there omissions? And for firms, this has become a challenge because people communicate so frequently with WhatsApp or Twitter or text. And that's why you see firms trying to mandate that their personnel, that those agents and investment advisor representatives either are operating on firm devices where they can track and record everything or not use those systems at all. Let's take a look at some of the other answer choices. We're always going to do this. Try and break it down. What about A? Do we have stricter record keeping for traditional communications versus off-channel? No, that's not the rule, right? If you're communicating with customers, communicating with clients or prospects, the rules are basically the same. Now, what A may have triggered in some of your minds is there is a little bit of a reduced threshold for how we treat real-time communications on social. And we treat that like correspondence as opposed to retail communications. That's where you're having that interactivity on an online platform. So maybe that was a shiny bit in A that grabbed you. B, record-keeping requirements are solely applicable to personal email and text messaging devices, excluding off-channel platforms. That's not the case at all, right? The regulators are thinking about this from, we don't care how you're communicating. We want to ensure that it's accurate, it's complete, it's truthful, nothing manipulative, nothing deceptive. And D, firms are responsible for determining their own record-keeping standards for off-channel communication systems. Well, we're not going to let each firm do its own thing. And we are going to set the standards and the minimums as the regulators that all firms have to meet. You do see some firms having stricter standards than what the record-keeping would require, maybe just to avoid any risk, but you're not going to see them being able to maintain their own standards overall. Very good. Let's take a look at question number 2. I hope you're getting into the groove of these review sessions now. You're pausing, you're reading the question, you're picking what you think is the best answer, then hit play, and we'll break it down together. A broker-dealer firm in state A prepares and sends an email blast to prospects in states A, B, and C. The broker-dealers registered in each of these states. The administrator or administrators from which state or states would have jurisdiction over these communications. Pause if you need to. make sure you're getting the most. This is not a passive activity. You're just listening to me. You are doing these questions and really think about, what is Dave going to break down? What kind of idea or insight or reasoning is he going to give for each of those answer choices? That's what you're thinking about. All right. Tough question. What answer choice did you go for? A. It is state A only. Now, email communications are considered offers in the state from which they originate. What's that just like? What else is treated as an offer only in the state of origination? That's right, TV and radio communications, and also newspaper ads in the state of publication. And email's treated the same way. I know it's a little bit interesting because we might think email is kind of more akin to, written communication or mail, traditional mail. But what's the problem with email? How is email more like TV, radio, and newspaper ads? You don't know the geographic location of the recipient. If you send an email to David Knopman, you don't know where I am. You don't know if I'm in New York, if I'm in California, if I'm in Utah, because my email address doesn't give any indication of that, in a way that if you mailed me a letter, you would see specifically what state I was in. And so for that reason, email is treated like those TV, radio, and newspaper ads. And so when you blast out the email, only the administrator in state A, where the email originated from, would have jurisdiction as an offer, even though state B and state C would have residents who received that email. Now, let's say I open up that email in state B as a retail client, and I'm like, oh, I want to jump all over this offer. I accept the offer and I do a transaction. So we engage in a sale as a result of the offer. Well, then we would have additional jurisdictions from, for example, if I was in state B administrator would also have jurisdiction, but not on the basis of the outbound email, but on the basis that the offer turned into a sale. So I hope that makes sense. When you get these kind of questions about jurisdiction, you're going to get jurisdiction questions, you really need to be precise in what is the nature of the communication, what is the channel, how is it going to be treated, because we have a lot of very similar kinds of messaging, but the way that you transmit can indicate or change who has jurisdiction. All right, let's keep going. Question number 3. Under the SEC's marketing rule for investment advisors, which of the following activities is considered advertising? Give it a pause. Take a look through all 4. All right, have you selected your answer? What is most likely going to be considered advertising? I'm going with C. Sending an email to a group of prospective clients offering new investment services. The marketing rule defines advertising as direct or indirect written communications made by an investment advisory firm to, and this is the key point, more than one person. So it's because we sent this message to a group that it turned into quote unquote advertising as opposed to just communications. And so that's where we want to dig in. The fact that they're prospective doesn't change the fact that it's advertising. And I think that makes sense because advertising by its nature is going to be directed primarily to new or prospective clients, not your existing clients. Of course, you can advertise to your existing clients, but the effort is, how do we bring in more assets to manage? How do we bring in more clients? Let's take a look at some of the other elements here. Conducting a live extemporaneous. What even does that mean? You should expect some of those like long, legalistic, difficult kind of words like extemporaneous to show up on your exam. You want to do your best to kind of get the context. If you don't know what a word means, like if you don't know what extemporaneous means, that's okay. Just ignore it. Certainly don't pick an answer because it has a word you don't know in it. People do that. You get a little scared. You're like, I don't know what extemporaneous means. It probably means advertising. But you want to be more careful than that. You want to be a little more thoughtful. If you don't know what a word means, your first attempt is to just ignore that word. So conducting a live Zoom meeting, discussing portfolio performance, with a single client. So if you just have one recipient, it's not going to be considered advertising. In B, we see providing a prepared printout during a meeting comparing historical performance in different interest rate environments to a single client. Again, if we know the definition of advertising for investment advisors, which is more than one person, more than one recipient, we can eliminate A and we can eliminate B, not even considering was it on Zoom, was it live, was it a printout, what did we discuss, because of that straight up definition. And D, filing a regulatory notice with the SEC containing required information. Well, regulatory notices and regulatory filings they're explicitly excluded from the definition of advertising. So the fact that the SEC says you have to file this thing, and I could go to the SEC's website, I could go to Edgar, I could download that thing, I could look at it. Maybe I'm even persuaded, having looked at the official document, that I'm like, oh, that prospectus, I want that thing, or that Form ADV has made me want to hire that particular firm. Regulatory notices not considered advertising. All right, so we know marketing rule for investment advisors, direct or indirect written communication made to more than one person. More than one person. All right, here we go. Question number 4. In the context of the SEC marketing rules definition of advertising for investment advisors, so we're in the same field, we're playing in that same space, what role do adoption and entanglement play regarding social media practices? Now, for this particular question, if you don't know what the term adoption and entanglement mean, that's going to be problematic. We can't just ignore those, because those are the very two words that this question gives us a chance to show the regulators we know. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to make sure we know those words. And so each time that you're doing practice questions, you're in the textbook, you're doing flashcards, and you see some of this kind of terminology that highlights itself, this question is about those words. We want to make sure that we commit to learning them. All right, I'm going to shut up for a second. Make sure you dig into each of the answer choices, then unpause the video when you're ready to go through it together. All right, have you had a chance? What I hope that you chose was choice C, that both adoption and entanglement are equally important criteria for determining whether a social media post has crossed that line into advertising. And we want to understand what both of those are. So adoption occurs if an investment advisor explicitly or implicitly endorses or approves information after it's published. So what kind of activities would adoption include? Well, it could be that we like a social media post. That is explicit endorsement or approval. You could see us maybe lifting a quote and saying, we approve this message, or we endorse this kind of message. For the implicit, meaning it's not necessarily in your face, that's where it can become a little more challenging. On the exam, I think you'll see less implicit and more explicit adoption. It'll be clear that the investment advisor endorses or approves the information. Now, what do you always see in the real world so that there's less risk of adoption occurring? You see that likes, retweets, follows is not an endorsement or an approval of the message. Why is that so prevalent, that kind of language, that the fact that we're engaging with another post doesn't mean we endorse or approve it? Well, it's so that they can argue we didn't adopt it. We might want to be in the arena, but we didn't adopt that message to be our own. We don't endorse that message, but that doesn't mean we can't speak to it. So that's why you see so often that explicitly people are saying we don't endorse, we don't improve it just because we're engaging with it. All right, what's the other piece of the puzzle here? Entanglement. Now, entanglement, I think, is both a little more challenging to find out in the real world, but I think it's a little bit easier on the exam, because entanglement occurs if an advisor participates in the preparation of the communication. If you're involved in crafting the message or setting forth the presentation, you become entangled in that message, and therefore it is more likely that you are engaging in advertising. On the exam, why do I think it's going to be a little easier? Because they have to tell you what the advisor did. They have to tell you the role that the advisor played in creation of the message. In the real world, that can be hard. That can be hard to find out in reality, and it can be hard to say, well, what was the degree of participation? So if you see participation, think entanglement, and very well could turn into advertising. If you see endorsement or approval of a message, that is adoption, and that can turn into advertising. Don't worry too much about the grayest grays, those really right down the middle, could be, couldn't be. I think you want to be more clear on the definition, and that both adoption and entanglement can create or convert a message of another party into the investment advisor's advertising. It's pretty wild. It's pretty wild. Well, maybe it's not that wild. It kind of depends on what you think wild is. Anyway, if you're in our world and you're all up in this regulatory stuff, that could be kind of wild. So you will now remember what those two terms are defined as. And again, I think it's important to pay attention to what are the terms and the words, the legalese, that you as a test taker are responsible for knowing. When do words become important that I really know specifically how they're defined? And for these tests, it's some of the most important. So when you see a question specifically asking, what does adoption, what does entanglement do? You have to know what those words are. Whereas on our last question about extemporaneous, it's kind of filler. You can make do not knowing what that was and still get that question right. All right, let's take a look at question number 5. Under the SEC's Investment Advisor Marketing Rule, testimonials and endorsements may be used in investment advisor advertising. Those compensated for their testimonials or endorsements are referred to as promoters, and the rule requires a written agreement when a promoter receives direct or indirect compensation of what minimum amount? Pause. This is a straight recall question. Can you remember? Trust yourself. Go with your gut, because you may have heard me talk about this number in the video lectures. You may have read about this number in your textbook. You may be drilled a flashcard on this when you were flashcarding, or maybe you did another question that hit on this very point, and somewhere deep in that brain is a number that's just dinging a little more brightly. All right, what number did you go with? What I hope you went with was $1,000. When a promoter is compensated either directly, so cash payment, or indirectly in some other means, it doesn't have to be in cash, could be in free trades, could be in other ways. It doesn't have to be straight cash. If there's value in excess of $1,000, then there has to be a written agreement in place with the promoter and the firm as required by the marketing rule. And this is going to promote fairness and transparency within the investment advisor industry, and ensuring that investors get a little extra protection by ensuring that investors have adequate information when evaluating the claims made by that promoter. Right? I want to know, hey, are you giving me a testimonial because you loved that financial services firm with all your heart? Or are you giving a testimonial for that firm because they're paying you a lot? And you can think about this in your own life. You see a celebrity or an athlete or somebody of that nature promoting a drink or a restaurant or a professional service provider. You're like, wait, does that athlete, does that celebrity actually love that company, or are they just getting paid? Because if they're getting paid, the claim carries a little less weight. And that's what this is all about. In particular, I always think this makes sense because so often within the financial services community, word of mouth, testimonials, referrals, things like that carry a lot of weight. And there's not as much, from the investor's perspective, you're not testing out that many different advisors. You're not regularly sampling all the different financial firms that are out there and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a little money, I'm going to give you a little money, I'm going to give you a little money, I'm going to take all these meetings. You kind of pick somebody. Often it's based on that referral or a testimonial or an endorsement by somebody you trust or know, and then you go all in because that's kind of what's efficient. And so for that reason, there's a lot of regulatory focus on ensuring that, hey, if there is a promoter, that it's okay to be promoting, but you got to also make disclosures. And it goes back to that larger idea, right? What's the larger idea within the securities industry? That disclosure cures the conflicts. When we think about securities and investments, you get a disclosure that details the risks. When we think about advisors, you get a disclosure that details all the information so you can make an educated and informed decision. And likewise, that's now applying to promoters and the compensation that they may be receiving. Now, why did they decide on 1,000? I don't have the specific reason, but they did decide they have to draw a line somewhere. And so it's at $1,000 of compensation that it's going to trigger disclosures. Question number 6. Investment advisor firms submit their initial application for registration on Form ADV, right? Short for advisor. I love that they did that, right? Form ADV is the form for advisors. Form ADV is comprised of multiple parts with information for both regulators and clients. Which part of Form ADV is the basis of the brochure supplement detailing information about the firm's investment advisor representatives? So, if you're an investment advisory firm, you're going to have to submit a bunch of parts in Form ADV. This question is asking, what is the basis of the brochure supplement? What tells you about the firm's investment advisor representatives? All right, have you had a chance? Were you able to remember this? This, again, fairly straight recall, but on this exam, there is a fair amount of just straight recall. You can't be somebody who's like, oh, I'm super smart, so on the exam, I'll just be able to figure out which part of Form ADV is the basis of the brochure supplement detailing information about the investment advisor representatives. Smartest person in the world can't just look at this and be like, oh, I can solve the puzzle. It's not a puzzle. It's just recall. And that's why doing the questions, doing the flashcards, repetition becomes so important. So you get exposure to all these different things they're not hard, but there's a lot of minutia. And with each passing exposure, you lay down another memory, you're going to be more likely able to recall that. Now, how many of you chose part 2? Which 2? Which 2? I just turned it into a 50-50 for you. To be or not to be. I always remember, are you to be my investment advisor representative or are you not to be my investment advisor representative? Of course, it doesn't totally work because it could be about to be my investment advisory firm. That'd be part 2A. But to be my investment advisor rep or not to be my investment advisor rep. Because if you think about it, many people select an investment advisory firm, not based on the firm's reputation, although some do. Many times you are interested in who's going to be your investment advisor representative. Who are you going to call when the markets are skittish? Who are you going to call when you need cash and you need to figure out how to reallocate? Who are you going to call when you retire and now you need to plan how your withdrawal phase from your investments? Who is going to be your investment advisor representative? When we think about the other parts, Part 1 of Form ADV is information for the regulators only. Part 2A is all about the firm. It is also disclosed to the client. So 2A is all about the firm itself, and 2B is all about the investment advisor representatives at the firm. So both 2A and 2B get disclosed to the clients as well as to the regulators. And then Form 3, Part 3 is actually the Customer Relationship Survey, the Form CRS, and that is delivered to all retail clients. So you may remember that Regulation Best Interest was promulgated not too long ago, and what that required is that firms make disclosures about who they are and their fees, what kind of clientele they're intending to serve, and so that's going to be now part of Form ADV Part 3. All right, I hope you like that one. To be my investment advisor rep or not to be my investment advisor rep? All right, hope that lands for you on the real exam. Question 7. XYZ Investment Advisors is a partnership, and it recently experienced a change in its ownership structure. A founding partner retired and sold her controlling interest to a new partner. According to the Uniform Securities Act, What action is required concerning this change? Think about this, pause, and unpause me once you've selected your answer choice. Okay. As before, C takes the win. When an investment advisory firm is organized as a partnership and there is a change in controlling interest, client consent is required before you can assign any clients to the new, quote unquote, new partnership. Because when we change that controlling interest in a partnership, we basically have a new partnership that has been created. And so under the Uniform Securities Act, when we see a change in the majority ownership of a partnership, we need client consent before we assign those contracts, those investment advisory contracts, and bring the clients from the old partnership to the new partnership. And that's the case even though the bulk of the partners here, the mission, the vision, the style, the fees, everything can be the same. But if we do see that change in controlling interest, we need client consent to make the assignments. Now, let's say what was changing here was a minority interest. Let's say it was a minority interest. Well, then we just need to give notice. So if there's a change in the partnership, that's not a change in majority ownership, not a change in control, then we just need to give that notification. What about A? Client consent is needed before any change in partners. Why is that wrong? Why is A wrong? It goes too far, right? This is what we're just talking about. Any change in partner, well, it depends on what's going on. If it's a change in minority ownership, then client notification is all that's needed. And B, what's wrong with B? Client notification is mandatory promptly after any change in partners. Well, that doesn't quite get it accurate either, because notification is required before we do a change in partnership. But that's not always right, because if the change in partners was going to be a change in majority or a change in the controlling interest, then notification is not sufficient. So both A and B are sometimes right, but they're sometimes wrong. And so when I see that kind of description, when I see an answer choice like A or like B, I give it a maybe. I say, well, A, it's not exactly detailed enough. It's not exactly right. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. B, same thing. Promptly after, the timing's not great. Notifications mandatory promptly after. Like, well, if I got the client consent, maybe I'd also have that notification element. Of course, I'd never want to read, notification to mean, well, there was consent required, and so they had to talk to the client about that. I want to be precise with the language. And then you get to C, and you say, they've narrowed it. In C, you can see that answer choice becomes more specific. Client consent is required before an assignment involving a transfer of a controlling interest. Boom. That's accurate as far as it goes. Are there other circumstances like transfer of a non-controlling interest, transfer of a minority interest? Sure. But C's not speaking to that and a little bit right and a little bit wrong. It's fully right as to the thing that it's saying. If I did find a statement that was a little more expansive and equally correct, well, then I would go with that. But in this case, that's not there. So I hope that kind of explains how I might attack some of these kind of questions. Because on this exam, you need to expect some of these medium and harder questions to really be nuanced, to really get into the weeds here and be like, well, I'm going with a more narrow answer choice because it's 100% accurate versus a broader, right, covering more circumstances, covering more cases type of answer choice, but that's not 100% accurate. I always want to focus first on, is it fully true? And then I might consider some of the other situations. All right, question number 8. Which of the following practices is prohibited for investment advisors and investment advisor representatives according to the NASA Statement of Policy and Model Rules? You should expect on the exam questions like this, where they say, according to NASA's Statement of Policy and Model Rules. So you got to put aside anything else that you may have learned for other FINRA exams. You have to put aside what you might want the law to be. You have to put aside what your firm may demand and require of you, and you have to show the regulators that you are familiar with the NASA statements of policy and model rules, and then pick the answers accordingly. We are looking for a practice that's what? That's prohibited here. We're looking for something that NASA finds offensive. So let's take a look. Actually, pause, you take a look, and then unpause me after you've had a chance to do so. Okay. What did you find to be a prohibited practice? Which did you find the most offensive? You know which one I didn't like? I didn't like B. I didn't like an investment advisor or an investment advisor representative exercising discretionary authority without reasonable grounds to believe that the recommendation is suitable. Exercising discretion on an investment that's not suitable for the client, that is no good. That's never going to work. So if I see that somebody's engaging in unsuitable, not just recommendations, but actual exercising discretionary authority, you are putting unsuitable recommendations into the client's account, buying and selling unsuitable things, big no-no, big red flag. But B's kind of wrapped up in the language, right? It's not straight up making an unsuitable recommendation, buying a terrible stock, a terribly unsuitable stock. No, it's okay. Exercising discretionary authority, okay. Without reasonable grounds to believe the recommendation suitable, you can begin to see how you really have to be careful. You really have to read in detail what is going on there. So, exercising discretion and purchasing or selling things that are unsuitable, that is always going to be prohibited according to NASA's statement of policy and model rules. And in fact, you didn't really have to be leaning specifically just into the NASA statements. There's no regulation, no firm allows for unsuitable types of activities. Let's break down why each of the other things is what. Are A, C, and D okay? Does the NASA model rules, the NASA statement of policy bless A, C, and D? Yeah, they do. They're not prohibited. So A says you recommend a securities transaction without obtaining written discretion authority within 10 business days. Oh, that's nasty. I like that. I like that answer choice. I like that answer choice because it blends two ideas together. So if you're an investment advisor representative or an investment advisory firm, are you allowed to recommend securities transactions? Of course you are. What are you hired for? You're hired to give advice. You're hired to make recommendations. And so you're allowed to do that on day one. Can you make a recommendation without obtaining written discretionary authority? Sure, because when you make a recommendation, you're seeking the client's consent. You're not making that trade on their behalf. You're not making that trade without talking to them. And so for that reason, this is totally fine. Let's break down that second part. What is obtaining written discretionary authority within 10 business days required for? That's required if you execute a transaction on a discretionary basis. Notice the difference. Execute a transaction on a discretionary basis. Yeah, then you need the written discretionary authority under the power of attorney within 10 business days. And that is only available to, you'll remember, investment advisor and investment advisor representatives. Broker-dealers and their agents can't do that. So A kind of takes those two ideas, smashes them up, and gives you a chance to show the regulators, hey, I know what's going on here. Very good, very good. What about C? Is there any prohibition on providing trade recommendations prepared by a third party? No, none at all, right? In fact, if you're an investment advisor or investment advisor representative, you may very well rely upon others' analyses, judgments, thoughts, processes to help inform what you do for your client. What would be the most important thing that if you're making recommendations prepared by a third party that you do? You just want to provide proper disclosure. And so my suspicion would be that most investment advisors and most investment advisor representatives, when you join their platform, they say, we are going to come to you with our own investment ideas, and we may also come to you with investment ideas that we believe in as prepared by third parties, and we will tell you whose ideas these are. And so that's fine. That's fine for you to do. How about D? Disclosing information about a client's identity or investments without consent. Oh, how many of you like this one? I bet a lot of you like this one because that kind of doesn't feel okay. Now, what's the problem with this? Or I should say, what's not the problem with this? Well, can we think of some circumstances where a firm might disclose information about a client's identity or investments even without the client's consent? There's two big circumstances that come to my mind. When required by law or by court. Required by law or by court. So, suspicious activity report. Boom. Client doesn't have to give consent. In fact, client doesn't even know what's happening. But we are making certain disclosures. There are other laws and legal obligations that firms have to make certain disclosures, and they will, and they tell you about that up front. We will make disclosures about who you are and what your investments are if a court compels us to do so. They might say, we'll fight it. We'll fight and defend your right to have your information remain private. But if the court says, hey, firm, you got to turn over the list, you got to turn over the investments, you got to turn over the positions, we're going to do so. We're not going to break the law ourselves to protect your privacy. And that's all up front. You can see it in their brochure. You can see it in the account agreement that they are willing and going to do those things. So how do we analyze D now to be a good test taker? Well, we have to be a little thoughtful. We have to be thoughtful about, okay, is there a circumstance where maybe D is allowed? Because we know there's a lot of circumstances where D is prohibited. And then you have to say, okay, but there are some circumstances. And then I compare that against B. And in B, I see that's just full on bad. There's just not a case to be made that like, oh, it's okay to execute or exercise discretion on unsuitable stuff. It's just not okay. So B is more prohibited if I had to rank them than D. Even though like if you press me and said, Dave, D, like good or bad? It's like, I don't think that really is a good thing. But you get the point. You're beginning to understand and see how that operates. All right, we got two more questions. Question 9, Reg SP. Under Reg SP, what's the time frame within which investment advisors are required to notify the SEC of data breaches? Straight recall. Reg SP, all about security and privacy, demanding that firms give notice to the SEC within what time period? What's your gut tell you? Because maybe you don't remember it. So what do you want to eliminate? Now, the right answer, 48 hours. 48 hours. How are you supposed to know that? You're just supposed to memorize that. You can't think hard and be like, was it 24? Was it 48? Was it 48 or was it 72? So 48 hours, investment advisors who are the victims of a data breach, who have had a data breach, who have, information been released or stolen or hacked, has to tell the SEC. Clients have to be notified within what time frame? Right, this is notify the SEC. What about the clients whose information's been compromised? Well, they have to be noticed, and this is by the rule, as soon as practicable. But you don't see that as an answer choice because then the rule actually gives some guidance as to what is the outer bounds of practicalness. 30 days. So clients, if you press me, I'd say, well, you got to do it as soon as you can. And if you say, well, how soon, like for real, like when is there going to be some teeth if I don't make the clients aware? Within 30 days of the data breach. All right. So that was our Reg SP, security and privacy. Last question in the session here. You work as an agent for a broker-dealer and you encounter a situation involving an older customer. The customer shows a sudden eagerness to transfer a significant amount of funds to an unfamiliar business, raising concerns about potential financial exploitation. What regulatory obligation should the broker-dealer fulfill in response to this scenario? Sad situation? Pause. Figure out what's your best answer. Okay. What did you choose? What should the broker-dealer do here? Best answer? File a suspicious activity report for suspected elder financial exploitation. So the suspicious activity report has been expanded and now includes tags and flags, meaning the kind of messaging the broker-dealer can communicate to FinCEN about what's suspicious, because they are now aggressively tracking and going after elder abuse. They are looking for, in particular, rings, criminal rings, who are going after elderly investors, and they are looking for those patterns. So the suspicious activity report can be triggered by actually some activity like this. What else? What else can a firm do in the event of potential or suspected elder abuse? Well, they can also put on temporary holds of any transactions and disbursements from that account in this event. What else can they do? The broker-dealer can contact the trusted contact person on the account, if there is one, to try and bring in somebody who's aware of the situation, who may be able to talk to this person and kind of get to the bottom of it. And so we can place those holds. We can place those holds on transactions or disbursements. We can file the suspicious activity report. We can contact the trusted contact person. What are we less likely to do? Well, A, we're less likely to advise the customer on the benefits of the business and proceed with the fund transfer. It's an unfamiliar business to us. C, do nothing unless the customer explicitly requests intervention. And that's certainly not the case. We're not going to be waiting for the customer to say, hey, I feel like I'm being exploited. I'm concerned about the elder abuse that might be taking place where I am the victim. That is not the threshold. That's going to be much too high. And that rarely happens, right? If a customer is concerned about that, a lot of times the scammers move on. And D, immediately process the fund transfer to avoid any inconvenience for the customer. That's simply not the rule. And sometimes folks kind of push back on me. They say, Dave, it's the customer's account. Customer said transfer the money. Who are you to second guess? And I think historically that may have been more of a reasonable position. But given the amount of elder abuse and exploitation that has taken place, the regulatory stance and the firm's positions has really shifted here and put in place a whole bunch of speed bumps. Because once that money's gone, it is gone. You are not going to be able to get that back. And so overall, the position has been, we are going to introduce some friction. We are willing to suffer a little bit of inconvenience to do overall degrees of protection, because so often people are being exploited. So file a SAR, put a temporary hold on transactions and disbursements, reach out to and contact the trusted contact person on the account to help mitigate or reduce the likelihood of any major abuse. All right. That takes us to the end of this review of Units 5 and 6. I hope that this was very useful for you. I hope that you learned a couple things both about the materials we covered and also how to think about these questions, how to break them down, what to do when you run into words that you're familiar with or less familiar with, and how to rank answer choices. How can I get to the best answer choice every single time? Thanks so much for joining me, everyone, and I wish you the best of luck in your exam and in your career.